Hello, my name is Kathleen Mullen, and I'm the Interim Executive Director of $3 Bill Cinema and the Festival Director of the Seattle Queer Film Festival. We are really happy to be here today for the Q&A of CURED, the documentary CURED. And we have two very, very special guests here, along with Maddie Schmidt, who is the festival coordinator of Seattle Queer Film Festival.
Hi.
So I'd like to introduce Patrick Salmon, who is a Seattle native and is the co-producer and director of CURED. Now living in the other Washington, D.C., he previously served as creator and executive producer of Codebreaker, an award-winning drama documentary about the gay British codebreaker Alan Turing, that reached more than 3 million viewers worldwide. So welcome,
good to be
Patrick.
with you.
We also have Don Kefner.
Kilhefner.
Kilhefner. We have Don Kilhefner, who is an LGBTQ rights activist, community organizer, and Jungian psychologist living in West Hollywood. He is a co-founder of multiple organizations, including the Radical Fairies and the LA Community Services Center, now the world's largest LGBTQ center. He dedicates much of his time to sparking intergenerational dialogue among members of the LGBTQ community. So I want to welcome you both. We're really excited to have you, especially with this incredibly interesting documentary that hasn't been made before. So we're going into new territories, and particularly in the way that you made it as well. So maybe, Patrick, you could talk a little bit about that process and about the making of the film and how you were able to bring it all together.
Yeah, my co-director Bennett Singer and we've been on more than a 5-year odyssey. I first decided to try and get this film made, I guess, late in 2015 or early in 2015. A friend of mine, Charles Francis, put this film on my radar, or this story idea on my radar. I knew a little bit about it, but in diving more deeply into it, I knew that it was an important story to tell, this seminal moment in the history of LGBTQ civil rights. And as I dived more deeply into the story, it became clear that this was a story that needed to be told. It's an important moment in our community's history. And we realized that the clock was ticking, that a lot of the people involved in this fight are at an advanced age. And so we really, hit the ground running and started interviewing as many people as possible, and then started lining up the funding. And so we embarked on it from there. From the film, we had an amazing archival research team. Murdu Chandra and Luann Jones, our archival producers, did a lot of incredible research. And then we were able to find great people who participated in this fight, like Don Kilhefner, who we're happy to have with us today. And then I also want to acknowledge the independent television service, ITVS, which is funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They put in a big chunk of money along with a lot of generous donors. It was a long road to get the funding lined up, and we're excited with the ITVS support that it'll eventually be on PBS broadcast nationally. So we're really excited to share this story with audiences. And even though it's a story about the past, it certainly has relevant lessons for today about social activism and how to create change.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're from Seattle, how did you make your way to Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, well, I graduated from Kennedy High School in Seattle, and all my family's still there, so it's very much a big part of me, and I still consider it my home. But I went away to college to Syracuse University, and then spent 5 years as a television news reporter in upstate New York and then in Northeast Tennessee. And from that experience, I learned to love writing and storytelling, but I hated fires, murders, and floods. So I knew that news reporting wouldn't be something I wanted to do forever. So I was drawn to documentary filmmaking and moved to Washington, D.C. in early 2003. I thought I would check it out for a year and see if I liked it. And here I am almost 20 years later. And then because I knew DC is behind New York and LA is the third best city for documentaries because of PBS and National Geographic, and also Discovery Channel, of course, used to be here. So there's a good, vibrant film community. So I moved here and have really consider it a great place to live, and have been really satisfied to dive into the history of our community and tell some important stories that hadn't been told before.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, you've done that with this one for sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And Dawn, one of my favorite parts of the film was when you were a part of the protest where you confronted the mental health establishment directly. And, I think that the direct action was like such an electrifying moment in the film. But part of what was so interesting to me was how it turned from this protest moment to a dialogue with the people who were there. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that for a little while.
Again, that action came out of the Gay Liberation Front of Los Angeles. And we'd done lots of protest demonstrations. And so I thought, that's getting a little old. Let's try something new with this group of people. Let's see if we can reconstitute their conference, maybe 200 people there in that particular panel discussion, and have them discuss the ethics, the morality of what to do. Because obviously, gay people aren't sick. There's no science behind anything that they're doing. And let's confront them. And so we broke into small groups of maybe 10 each with 2 members of the Gay Liberation Front in each group. And we forced them to talk about what they're doing and why politically, morally, spiritually, it was incorrect. Did I answer your question?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
How did your experience with that sort of meld into your more recent activism experience with the Community Services Center?
Well, I've been involved in the Los Angeles gay lesbian community for over a half century, 50 years, continuously. So there are different periods of my life in Los Angeles. But the Gay Community Center in Los Angeles came out of the Gay Liberation Front, came out of a revolutionary, radical social change movement. And one of the reasons why we created that community center was, first of all, to provide services specifically designed for gay and lesbian people, and secondly, to create a community. Community did not exist at that time. Gay people were afraid to congregate largely. And so we opened a community center, and we said, this will be a center around which a community could coalesce, and it worked. A gay community, a very thriving gay community, developed in Los Angeles. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And then in terms of like, sort of, we have the past and we have this film that's, is very important, a piece of history. But in terms of how over time, and I think this is really for both of you, and maybe you can start with Patrick, like how over time you think that activism has changed within the LGBTQ community, and in maybe. Yeah, just if you could speak about that, and maybe how, like, because there's still conversion therapy and there's still things are going on around that, so the fight continues around issues around mental health and stigma.
It continues differently.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. That the assault against the mental health industry in 1969 began in 1969 with gay liberation, where there was direct action against them, not asking for them to emancipate us, but we were liberating ourselves. So gay liberation was a liberation movement. We were going to take power back for ourselves. We were not going to ask for acceptance from anybody. We were encouraging self-acceptance. One of the ways it's changed today is that we live in a very conservative period as far as gay and lesbian history is concerned. And so today it's more based on gay assimilation, gay people imitating heterosexual culture and lifestyles. And there's very little in the way of any kind of radical politics happening in the gay community anywhere in this country. One of my gentle criticisms of this of the documentary that we're talking about is that it doesn't talk about heterosexual supremacy. At this moment in Black Lives Matter history, in this moment, understanding the systemic repression of the people is very important. And there's none of that in this documentary. It's largely about law reform, getting them to change their law. There's nothing about restructuring of the society so that women, people of color, gay people, white people are changed structurally, that our system is changed structurally. So we live in a very conservative time politically, as far as LGBTQ people are concerned.
That's very interesting.
And I think building off what Don was saying, one of the things that struck me is the tension which Don was alluding to, but the insiders and the outsiders, sort of this mix of people who wanted to throw rocks from the outside, which was important, the direct action, but then also engaging the levers of power to create change. And it's interesting to me that Don was able to do both, sort of the direct action, but also engaging with the decision makers. And then there was a group of people who were also trying to create change from within the APA. And we interviewed those people in the film, and they sort of recoiled at the outside activism, but it really is the outside activism that laid the groundwork for those people to do the inner working and the maneuvering within the APA. And you see it similar throughout social change movements, where you need the anger, you need the energy in the streets, you need the protesting, but you also need sort of the ability to translate that energy into changing the policy or the laws and all of that. And I think it's the interplay of the two. And it's really, I think, across social change movements and certainly in our own movement for civil rights.
Yeah, and I found like within the film, I mean, you had the whole range of sort of the different, like definitely the activists that were in there, you know, sort of demanding change, and then the psychiatrists that were also some of them were also activists, but from within.
I would challenge that statement a little bit.
Okay, good.
Because we saw in a friendly way. we saw in that film a gay psychiatrist putting on a mask.
Yes, we did.
To talk to that group of members of the APA. At the time, we in gay liberation were astounded by that, insulted by that a gay MD psychiatrist would put on a mask to talk to his fellow colleagues. It was what he was doing, was validating his own oppression. And that's what the APA, gay and lesbian members, and there were a few lesbian members of the APA were validating their own oppression. And so there's something about watching that APA meetings and discussions and what have you, which is really very sad. Because here were people who were validating the violence against them, the psychological genocide that was being committed against them, and not speaking out.
Let me challenge you a bit there, Don. I'm interested in your viewpoint. In hindsight, though, do you think Dr. Fryer's presentation worked? It was dramatic. It was sort of almost Hollywood-like, where he has to wear a mask, because in many ways, it amplified the discrimination that he faced, knowing that he would have had to choose between his livelihood and helping people as a psychiatrist or making this case. So could he have done what he did if he didn't have the mask on?
In a very friendly way, I would say it was a joke. It was more of an embarrassment than it was a statement of power or self-acceptance. We had the same situation here in Los Angeles when I and a few other people from Gay Liberation appeared on a public television show. First time they covered Gay Liberation, and the technical staff, cameramen, sound people, refused to film it unless we covered our faces. They could black out our faces. And we said, absolutely not. And we just sat firm and we said, we're not moving until you film this show. As we are, with our real names, with our real faces, here we are. And finally, the union steward had to be called in and said, you gotta work. You gotta show these people as they are. So Gay Liberation wouldn't put up with that oppression. The APA and those gay members of the APA, they were not cutting edge figures. In many ways, they were plantation members secretly working behind the scenes as gay men who had very little respect for themselves. Now, those might be radical statements, but I think that needs to be said in the current age that we live in.
Yeah, and I think that's very interesting. But do you think, though, that the changes could have been made without the two? Like, I think the changes that were made to sort of, having it declared not a mental illness was because of the two groups working on it. Like, do you think that they could have had the change if there hadn't have been psychiatrists that were within pushing for the change?
There are two ways of answering that question. One is it was important that we were declared not ill.
Yeah.
It was important for the larger society.
Yeah.
For courts and other schools and what have you, getting that message that these people were not ill. The other side of that is, by 1973, gay liberation was having its impact in this country. And people were living openly, free lives, and paying very little attention to the APA. You get it? So there are two levels at which that was working. Yeah. One, it was helpful for the dominant culture. Secondly, gay and lesbian people at that time were living their lives, paying very little attention to the APA.
I was surprised in talking to a number of people a bit younger than Don who remembered as teenagers hearing this news on the radio. And so I would, again, to respectfully disagree with my friend, that while it may not have been important to the people who were, or may not have been as important to the people who were involved in gay liberation, creating the change on the ground, for the people who were just starting to realize who they were as a 14 or 15-year-old. I remember one of the people I talked to remembered hearing it on the radio and immediately understanding how significant it was for himself. And so I think it paved the way to have more people more easily join the fight. Now they might have, they probably would have eventually, but I think that search as a teenager, when you go to a library and read that book about who you are and trying to make sense of yourself, when, in the 60s reading that you were mentally ill, and the same, a different 15-year-old a decade later having, a different wording in the book, I think was transformative. And
that's why I answered that question two ways, saying it was good for the dominant culture and gay people in the dominant culture. And it was, the other element was gay people were already living their lives as if they were healthy.
Okay. I love this discussion. And yes. And Don, I think it's interesting. You brought up a good point about the filmmaking. And so how, you made a choice in sort of how you were making this film. And maybe you could talk about sort of what you, Patrick, what you brought into the film and what you didn't, and the actual structure, which was quite interesting without a narrator.
Yeah, well, I mean, a couple things. We one of the big decisions was whether to include the voices of historians and other experts. But we realized that we had the most important experts who we interviewed, and we talked to a lot of historians and and psychiatrists and people throughout the production. So they were very much involved in providing us feedback and input. And we even did some on-camera interviews with some of those folks. But ultimately, we decided in terms of presenting the film that it was best to let the people who participated in it, who were the eyewitnesses, who developed the strategy, who created this change. We thought they were the experts. There's a theme throughout a number of the people we interviewed. They were fighting to be the experts on their lives, which I know Don and his fellow protesters talked about at that 1970s app. We want to be the experts on our lives is what their mantra was.
We want to be, we are.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And so we thought, let those experts tell the story of how this change came about. And one of the things we tried to do was marry the present day recollections with archival material from the past. And Don talked about that historic television interview we did. We were able to track that footage down and include a soundbite from Don in that period. And a number of the other main characters, we were able to do the same thing, where, for example, Dr. Charles Silverstein, a psychologist and gay liberation activist, was on 60 Minutes in 1973 making the case for this DSM change, and we were able to have the two together. So I think that what that did is it really brought the story to life, where you're able to see people involved in this fight and then hear them tell their story in the present day.
Yeah. You know, one of the ways I think this film is very, very important, especially for young LGBTQ people today, it shows that social change can happen. Social change can take place. You gotta be militant, you gotta be out there, you gotta know what the issues are, but social change can happen. Again, Black Lives Matter is showing us one way of doing it. Now it's time for the gay lesbian community to organize and begin fighting back again. And this film is an excellent document that shows us how to do that on all levels.
Yeah. And how, and in that, like, what do you sort of recommend in terms of sort of taking action? I mean, in terms of, I think, you know, there's a lot going on with our rights could be potentially in jeopardy. And in terms of sort of, you know, do we march on the streets? Like, what is sort of your perspective in terms of how to push for change?
One of the things that is important is to see social media as a means, as a tool, rather than an end in itself. I think Black Lives Matter, the insurrection that took place this year, showed us the power of getting out in the streets and confronting that power. Radically, militantly, peacefully, confronting that power. So that's what we need to do. You mentioned a time of retrenchment. I mean, two Supreme Court justices just this week suggested that the marriage ruling be revoked. So we're entering a very dangerous time for us as gay.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think another piece of that is, and you asked about it earlier, but I didn't get around to answering, the conversion therapy is still a real thing. There are people who, parents who try to send their minor children to LGBTQ children to conversion therapy to, quote, get fixed. And I know there's a number of organizations nationally and at the state and local level who are working to have bans put in place, but we have to continue to, particularly on that issue, continue fighting aggressively for these bans, but also understanding that there's no way to ban people, religious organizations for using spiritual, in quote, spiritual counseling to get people to, quote, change. So you need to challenge those voices aggressively and share the stories of young people whose lives have been destroyed and really harmed by this terrible conversion therapy. And so hopefully this film can be used as a piece of that ongoing discussion and conversation about why conversion therapy needs to be banned.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Maddie? Oh.
I would like to hear what you are up to right now. I know we're in sort of a crazy time, so it's a lot of sitting at home, but love to know what you're doing, activism, film, all of that?
Yeah, well, I guess my activism right now is through this film in terms of the distribution. It's as you can imagine, it's a full-time job getting this film out in the world. In many ways, making the film was the easy part. Now, distributing it around the world is really our focus now. We've partnered with a London distribution company who will be selling it around the world to broadcasters and streamers. So we really particularly want to bring it to places where, being queer is still a crime and people are being imprisoned, people are being even executed. So we really hope it can reach all corners of the globe, and the activism that the film highlights can inspire the kind of change that needs to happen in so many places. In the short term, we've got an outreach grant from the APA Foundation to help us partner with mental health organizations and with LGBTQ organizations to do virtual screenings like the one we're doing now. On the one hand, in-person screenings are great, but the reality of virtual screenings in this time is we're able to reach more people with it who maybe don't have the means or inclination or access to get to their local theater. So people from all over the country will be able to hopefully see this film online. So that's my production partner and I, Bennett Singer, and I are working around the clock to get this film in in front of as many people as possible, and really use it as a tool to spark discussion and dialogue.
Absolutely. Right now, what I do for the last 20 years or so is facilitating intergenerational communication, cooperation in Los Angeles. I'm working now with a queer intergenerational group that is planning to organize a book called Becoming a Queer Elder, eldering and intergenerational consciousness, trying to fill that gap in our community. We have a great deal of age apartheid in the LGBTQ community, trying to create an intergenerational community. My days as a warrior are over at 82, and so I'm now functioning in the role as gay tribal elder.
And that brings up one of the pieces of our outreach campaign we hope will be to use the film to spark intergenerational dialogue, hopefully working with organizations like SAGE and organizations that are out there, and bringing together today's activists with the heroes from yesterday who are still a part of the fight and whose voices and wisdom are an important piece of moving forward as a community.
Absolutely. And if you have any resources or websites, please send them to us, and we can put them up on our website, or where people will be watching the film. We'd love to sort of include those. In terms of actions for people, because I think those are always really useful to have, and for people to be able to know sort of where to go, what to do, what would be helpful.
Will you include a call for submissions to the book?
Absolutely, we can put that on our website as well. Yeah,
I'll get in contact with you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll connect, Dawn, I'll connect you afterward by email, and you can share that. Yeah,
I'd look forward to that book. That would be really, I know a few people to send it to.
It's innovative and very much needed in our community.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, I want to thank you for today. It's been really a great conversation. Thank you for participating. Do you have any final things you wanted to say, or we?
Vote November 3rd, and you know how to vote.
Yes, everybody has to vote.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. I want to thank BECU, who has supported our programming this year and this film. And so thank you very much. And thank you to the two of you for participating.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you.